Open your banking app right now. Look at that number. Your savings account, your retirement fund, whatever you've worked years to build. Now cut that number in half. That's what it will be worth in 2035. Not because of a market crash, not because of hackers, but because the Federal Reserve has a plan and you are the one paying for it. Here's what they don't teach you in school. When the government owes $38 trillion and has no way to pay it back, they don't send you a bill. They don't raise your taxes. They do something far more sophisticated. They steal from you invisibly, 1 percentage point at a time. It's called inflation. But that word has been sanitized. It sounds like an economic term. Something abstract that happens to, quote, zero. Let me reframe it for you. Inflation is a hidden tax. It is the government reaching into your wallet while you sleep and taking a little bit every single night. Right now, the official inflation rate is around 3 to 4%. The Federal Reserve tells you this is normal, manageable, transitory. But let's do the math they hope you never do. At 5% inflation per year, your money loses half its value in 14 years. If you have $100,000 in savings today, by 2038, it will have the purchasing power of $50,000. You didn't spend it. You didn't lose it in a bad investment. The Federal Reserve simply erased it. This is not a prediction. This is the plan. You might be thinking, why would the Federal Reserve do this? Isn't their job to protect the dollar? That was the old job. We are now living under a new regime called fiscal dominance. The Federal Reserve is no longer independent. It no longer works for you. It works for the Treasury Department. Its primary mission is no longer to fight inflation. Its primary mission is to keep the United States government solvent. Here's the problem. The U.S. government is spending more on interest payments on the debt than it is spending on the entire military. The interest bill is approaching $1 trillion per year, and it's accelerating. If the Federal Reserve raised interest rates to 10%, like Paul Volcker did in the 1980s to crush inflation, the interest payments on $38 trillion would be $3.8 trillion per year. That is more than the total tax revenue of the United States. The government would collapse overnight. So the Fed is trapped. It cannot raise rates high enough to actually stop inflation, because doing so would bankrupt the country. Instead, it has to keep rates artificially low, below the real rate of inflation. This creates negative real interest rates. And negative real interest rates are the weapon they use to steal your wealth. Let me show you exactly how they do it. The Federal Reserve uses 3 tools to ensure that you cannot escape and that you don't even realize you're being robbed until it's too late. Tool number 1, the captive buyer. In a free market, if a government is $38 trillion in debt and spending recklessly, investors would say, quote, but the U.S. government can't afford 15%. So they rig the game. Through banking regulations like Basel III and Dodd-Frank, the government forces banks, pension funds, and insurance companies to buy U.S. Treasury bonds. Regulators classify treasuries as high-quality liquid assets. Banks are legally required to hold them to satisfy capital requirements. It doesn't matter if the bonds only pay 2%. It doesn't matter if inflation is 5%. The banks must buy them to stay in business. This is financial conscription. Your pension fund isn't buying government debt because it's a good investment. It's buying it because it's illegal not to. You are being forced to lend money to a bankrupt government at negative real rates. You are the lender, and you are guaranteed to lose. Tool number 2, the broken thermometer. If you want to pay people less, but you've promised to pay them based on inflation, the easiest solution is to lie about inflation. Social Security payments are tied to the Consumer Price Index, CPI. If CPI says inflation is 3%, retirees get a 3% raise. If CPI says inflation is 8%, the government has to pay 8% more. The government has $1 trillion incentive to keep the CPI number low. So they cheat. Since the 1980s, the methodology for calculating CPI has been quietly rewritten. They introduced something called substitution bias. The logic goes like this. If the price of steak goes up, you won't buy steak anymore. You'll buy hamburger instead. Therefore, your cost of living didn't actually go up. See the trick? They measure your declining standard of living and call it stable prices. They also use hedonic adjustments. If a new iPhone costs $1,200 and the old one costs $1,000, but the new one has a better camera, The government says the price didn't really go up. The increase is adjusted downward because you're getting more value. By these statistical gymnastics, the government saves billions in payments every year. If we use the 1980 methodology to calculate CPI today, inflation would be double the official number. They are gaslighting you about the cost of your own survival to protect the federal budget. Tool number 3, the money printer. When foreign countries like China and Japan stop buying U.S. debt, which they have been doing for years, someone has to step in. That someone is the Federal Reserve. The Fed prints money and buys the Treasury bonds that nobody else wants. This is called quantitative easing, QE. It keeps the government's borrowing costs low, but it floods the economy with new currency. Every time the Fed buys $1 trillion in bonds, it creates $1 trillion out of thin air. That new money doesn't make the country richer. It just makes every existing dollar worth less. Your savings account didn't grow. The pile of dollars in the economy grew, and your share of the pile shrank. This is legalized counterfeiting, and you are the victim. Now here's where it gets truly evil. The theft is not hitting everyone equally. When the Federal Reserve prints $1 trillion, they don't mail a check to every American. They don't drop cash from helicopters over the heartland. They inject the money into the financial system. They buy bonds from Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, and BlackRock. These institutions get the new money first, at zero interest. They use it to buy assets, stocks, real estate, private equity. By the time this money trickles down to you in the form of wages, prices have already gone up. The rich get the money before inflation. You get the money after inflation. This is called the Cantillon effect. It was discovered in the 18th century, and it perfectly explains the K-shaped economy we're living in today. Since 2008, the wealth of the top 10% has exploded because the Fed has been pumping up the value of their stocks and real estate. The bottom 90% has seen their wages stagnate while the cost of rent, food, and healthcare has skyrocketed. The Federal Reserve is not creating prosperity, it is creating inequality. It is liquidating the middle class to pay off the national debt. But the Federal Reserve has one more tool. It hasn't been deployed yet, but it's being built right now in the basement of the central bank. It's called a central bank digital currency, a CBDC. Right now, the Fed's ability to control your money is limited by physical cash. If they set interest rates at -5% to force you to spend, you could just withdraw your money and put it under your mattress. Physical cash is your escape hatch. It's the ultimate check on government power. A CBDC removes that escape hatch. If the dollar becomes purely digital, the Federal Reserve gains total control. They can implement negative interest rates instantly, deducting 2% from your account every year to punish you for saving. They can set expiration dates on money, forcing you to spend your stimulus check within 30 days or it vanishes. They can program the money. They can decide what you're allowed to buy. They can freeze your account if you donate to the wrong political cause. This is not a conspiracy theory. It's already happening in China with the digital yuan. The Federal Reserve has openly published research papers on CBDCs. They are coming. The transition to a cashless society is not about convenience. It's about control. It's about eliminating your last option to opt out when the great wealth transfer accelerates. So what do? The answer is simple but uncomfortable. You cannot save your way to wealth anymore. Saving in dollars is financial suicide. If you keep your money in a savings account earning 3% while real inflation is 7%, you are volunteering to pay off the national debt. You are the donor class. The only way to protect yourself is to own assets the government cannot print. Real estate, stocks in profitable companies, gold, Bitcoin, commodities, anything scarce. We are entering the era of forced speculation. To simply preserve your wealth, you are now required to take risks. The safe option, saving cash, has been weaponized against you. The American dream of working hard, saving money, and retiring comfortably is dead. We are now in the era of asset survival. The Federal Reserve is not going to admit any of this. They will use terms like accommodative monetary policy and inflation targets and dual mandate. They will never say the words, "We are stealing half your savings." But the math doesn't lie. 5% inflation for 14 years equals a 50% loss of purchasing power. That's the plan. That's the policy. And you are paying for it. In the next video, we're going to show you what happens when the government stops being polite about it. In 1933, Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 6102, making it illegal for American citizens to own gold. He confiscated the gold of an entire nation under threat of 10 years in prison. It happened before. The legal precedent exists, and today they're eyeing Bitcoin, your 401k, and anything else you think you own. You need to know if your wealth is actually yours, or if it's just on loan until the government needs it. Hit that subscribe button. This is the information they don't want going viral. I'll see you in the vault.